And welcome back to another episode of Megabase Machines and Oxygen Not Included with your host, Greasy Hammer. I want to ask you something. Have you ever noticed that ceramic tends to run out just when you need it most? Especially once you start making lots of insulated tiles and pipes? Well, I want to show you something that will fix this problem once and for all. This machine here, this produces ceramic on industrial scale, roughly at 2 kilos per second. You get about 1.2 tons every cycle. Okay, so how does all this work? Well, for the feedstock, we have polluted water coming in and it pools down here. And then you also have sand coming in on a conveyor belt. And then we need coal, which is delivered here. You can also use conveyor belt for that. And here we have a dupe. Don't forget the dupe. Now, where you get polluted water, we're not going to go into that. Lots of ways to make that. Sand that's coming in. Let me show you. This is coming off of a machine that's crushing sand. And the machine is kind of a machine. It's mostly a bunch of dupes crushing sand from igneous rock that's coming off a regolith melter. But anyway, here it comes. And as far as coal is concerned, well, you can get that from setting up a bunch of stone hatch farms. Works pretty well. If you get a lot of igneous rock coming off a regolith melter, you can feed a lot of that into stone hatch farms. Works really well. Now, you could also use cooled regolith instead of sand here. But honestly, you're much better off sending your regolith to a melter and then just crushing the igneous rock that comes off that once the heat has been extracted. Check out the link below to see how to efficiently process igneous rock back into magma. But okay, enough about that. Let's have a look at this machine here. So the main principle that is running this machine is the fact that polluted water off-gases into polluted oxygen. And this process is very slow if you're just using tiles of polluted water. What you need to do is to supercharge this process. And for that, you're going to need bottles of polluted water. And here we see several of them. And literally, they hold tons of water very efficiently, and they off-gas massively. Now, before we get too much into that, let me just talk about the basics of this chamber. So first of all, you need to build a closed chamber, and you're going to need a liquid lock here. And you're going to need an atmosuit, and you only really need one dupe to ever go in here at a time. So you want to restrict that using a single atmosuit dock. This keeps other dupes from jumping in here. And you also want to make sure this area is sterile, ideally. You don't have to if you don't want to, but if you keep it clean, then it's going to be fine. And if you don't keep it clean, it's going to be full of germs. Everything will get germs on them. And you're going to have oxygen coming out with germs eventually, and clay with germs. It'll be pretty nasty. So ideally, try to keep it clean. Put a hand sanitizer here, and that's all you need. So once you have all that situated, you want to set up some gas pumps here, and you want to close this up and then pump all the gas out. And then once you have that emptied out, you can go ahead and start pumping in polluted water into here, and we'll just begin to off-gas initially just from the tiles of polluted water, and that's fine. What you want here is to fill this room with polluted oxygen anyway, so there's no problem with that. Now, the way you fill polluted water into here is, I just use plumbing, and currently it's a little bit empty, but it's not an issue because this room is so full of polluted oxygen. You can see here it's extremely high pressure and about 900 kilos per tile, which is really high. So this really doesn't need to be topped up for a while, but if it is constantly being topped up, and right here, if this pipe gets backed up, that's fine, because what happens is this vent here will overpressure and it will stop filling up this room. So nothing will ever overflow here. It'll only ever fill this bottom layer here, and that will keep everything safe. And you don't need any automation for any of this. Okay, so next we need to make sure that we automate as much as possible. We automate the bottling process. This is the key to this whole thing working. And what I did was I've used Brothgar's experiment for this, and I will post a link below, so make sure to check out his original video on this. And with some additional refinement, I got this working properly. And the way this is set up particularly is we have a couple of reed fibers on each side, one on each side. And if you just want to have a really basic setup, you can just have one. And in this case, we have two for a mirror setup. This is to double the efficiency of this machine. And these thimble reeds, they always need irrigation, but they never really get any. And so what ends up happening is dupes always want to irrigate them, and you can increase or decrease the priority here. And this also counts as farming task. Whereas you can alternatively use bottle emptiers with auto bottle, and that will not count as farming task. It's really up to you. Either way, you want dupes to always try to like deliver water to here. And the next part of this is actually stopping them in their track. So what's happening here is we have a couple of motion sensors that detect a dupe, and they will shut this door. And here's a little bit of automation. We have an OR gate here, which trips if either one of these sensors trips, and then it will trip this NOT gate, which will then trip the door to close. At which point the dupe will just stop in its tracks and drop the bottle down. And this door right here, same here, this horizontal door, that's very important because you want to slow down these dupes. If you don't slow them down and they get very skilled up and fast, they will be able to run to this door and the sensors will not be able to trip in time. So these horizontal doors, they slow them down very efficiently. You don't need any checkpoints or anything. And the next thing is we have a couple of additional doors here. These are mesh doors, and so water bottles will just fall through them, but dupes can walk on top of them. So it's perfect for the setup. When these bottles are off-gassing like crazy, you need to remove this polluted oxygen out of here as quickly as possible. If you don't, what happens is the bottles themselves will get overpressured and they won't emit anymore. And so you can't use really regular pumps for this, regular gas pumps. They're just too weak. You need something a little bit more supercharged. So what we have here is none other than a bypass pump. And a gas bypass pump allows you to pump massive quantities of gas from one room to another using a special mechanism. And you can have a look at how this mechanism works in a link below. And Tony Advanced on his channel posted a really nice video about this, explaining how the process works. So if you check it out, you'll know a little bit more about this. But long and short of it is you need two liquids on top of each other here and a tile right here. Okay, and what this does is it exchanges this tile of liquid with this tile of gas. And they just trade places. And this process continues. We have one liquid here in form of naphtha, and a second liquid is provided constantly by this liquid vent. And the second liquid, it's just polluted water. Now, we don't need to provide this liquid at high rate. We just use 0.1 grams in this case. This valve controls it. Let me show you the plumbing. Okay, what we have here is a reservoir, which will last you for the rest of the game, really, because this valve is only 0.1 grams. And then it passes to this vent. But in case this vent goes over pressure, you don't want liquid to build up here, because if it ever builds up and then it releases a large amount, then you're just going to have a pool of polluted water. And this happened before. That's why we have these pumps. But then I installed this bypass here, and these pumps they're never needed anymore. The bypass will just put the water back into the reservoir. Now, this 0.1 grams, because it's such a small amount of liquid, what happens is when it falls down here, it instantly gets exchanged and then it gets deleted. So this water, it never pools anywhere. The game just deletes it because it's such a small amount. If you put a larger amount, it will pool up here. Okay, enough about that. Let me show you something here. Okay, this overlay will help to explain the different areas in a little bit more detail. So first we have the yellow area. This is the low pressure polluted oxygen. We have the red area. This is the high pressure polluted oxygen. And we have the light blue area. This is mixed. So we have polluted and then we have clean oxygen on the bottom. And then the dark blue area, this is where clay gets dumped and the kiln processes it into ceramic. So what happens is this high pressure polluted oxygen, once it pools in here, it just pushes its way down where it's met by a whole bunch of deodorizers. I found 9 on each side, works really well. And then these deodorizers are fed by a whole lot of sand, which comes on a conveyor belt here, which is fed by auto sweepers. And then they produce clay, which is then fed onto a second belt, which then is fed into the kilns. And you only need one kiln for this because it runs this kiln. This whole machine runs at one kiln at 100% constantly. And the second kiln here is just in case. You can use it for something else as well. The ceramic that gets collected goes into another belt and then gets just dumped into a pool of coolant. In this case, it's just salt water. You can use whatever you want. You cool the ceramic to room temperature and you're good to go. And like I said, coal is fed into these kilns by dupes. But again, you can set up a conveyor belt. I just didn't bother with it. Now, one other thing. The oxygen that's produced, the clean oxygen that's produced by these deodorizers, well, you got to remove it somehow. So we have these pumps, which we initially used as vacuum pumps. And now we're just pumping out oxygen out of here. And with this clean oxygen, occasionally you're going to get a little bit of polluted oxygen. So you want to make sure to sift that off. And we have these passive pumps, passive filters. And again, I can post a link by Tony Advanced on how to set these up. These are excellent filters to use. And you get this polluted oxygen back into this chamber. And if this is overpressured, it just goes into this low pressure chamber here in yellow. And the clean oxygen just gets fed out. And you just feed it into your main base or whatever you want to do. And then any excess, you just dump it into a compressor. And you always want to compress the excess, ideally, so that this pipe never fills up. Because with this kind of a filter, if this pipe is filled up, then you're going to have clean oxygen feeding back into this area, which is not end of the world, but you don't want to do that. So you want to keep this area as polluted as possible. No clean oxygen. You just get rid of your clean oxygen through the plumbing here. And that's it. And, oh yeah, one other thing. You can also pump out polluted oxygen out of here. I just didn't bother again. And you can use this elsewhere if you want. For instance, you can feed it into your mushroom farm, where puffs would just convert the polluted oxygen into slime. And then you can have a mushroom farm. I'll make a separate video about that. But yeah, that's all I had to say about that. And in conclusion, this machine produces 1.2 tons of ceramic per cycle. And in my case, you never run out. So I think you'll find this very handy in your base. So if you found this useful, please give it a like and feel free to share and subscribe. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.